Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Brumm. Most people know me as Mickey. I was born and raised in Marquette on East Magnetic Street, where I currently live with my 92-year-old mother. I am a working patent attorney with my own practice in patent law. I'm also a chemical engineer by way of Michigan Tech, and I'm also a lawyer by way of the University of Michigan. A while ago, the issue of rezoning Cliffs Dow for residential use came up. It's going to be decided Monday night in the City Commission meeting. And one of the commissioners, brand new lady, posted that how come me, a candidate, knew more about Cliffs Dow than she did. She's only been in town 4 years. So I thought that's a reasonable question if you've only been in town 4 years. I went to the library looking for the book on Cliffs Dow. They have books on beer, bootleggers, brothels, ships, shipwrecks, everything imaginable, immigrants, buildings, every building in the city, except there's nothing on Cliffs Dow. So basically this presentation is the history of the Cliff Dow Chemical Company and how it relates to current decisions. And somewhere along the line I realized I probably was writing the book of Cliffs Dow, though that wasn't the intent. But what you will get out of this presentation is, what is Cliffs Dow? What did it do? It shut in 1969. Why are we still fussing about it now? And what should I do as a resident of this area? Okay? Any question is reasonable. This is being videotaped because I had a request to have it videotaped and put on YouTube. So act accordingly. I said act accordingly because a lot of people do YouTube stuff. And there's a lot of information in the beginning about chemistry. I will not try to overwhelm you, but I'm going to keep referring back to certain terms, so I'm defining them up front. Don't worry, the whole thing isn't chemistry, just a few slides, all right? I say don't worry because not everybody likes. This was the plant when it was in operation in the 30s, and for perspective, there's a man mowing the lawn in the lower left-hand corner. Does everybody see him? This was the one picture I got. I think this came from Jim Koski, and it shows the smoke. The plant operated 24/7, and the smoke never stopped. We have people coming in. I think you can come down the center. Let me get a spot for you here.
We'll go right here.
You're going to be okay?
We're good.
You can see. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, we want people to be able to see.
Thank you.
All right, so this was the plant. What I cannot duplicate for you, because it's too dangerous, I can't duplicate the smell. The smell was the worst campfire you ever smelled, with all sorts of gunky other smells in there, thick on your tongue, is the best way I can describe the smell. And it was 24/7 for 35 years. And if anybody smelled it, am I exaggerating?
Oh,
Okay,
not
yes,
at
ma'am.
all. Yes, actually the smell was kind of interesting, that asphalt smell. In fact, when they were digging it up a few years ago, that odor.
Yes, they had a really bad time. In 2011, they had some problems at the site and they dug it up and the smell came back and there were some illnesses associated. All right, so when you look at this, think of that thick, rocky smell in your face. History of the Cliffs Dow Chemical Company, written by me, researched by me. I did a Freedom of Information Act with the state EGLE department. I went to Northern's archives. I did the archives at the Peter White Public Library. I did the Michigan Regional Historical Society archives. In other words, I didn't just look on the internet and throw a few things together. I've got the original source documents at home. Anybody who's seen where I work, it's a stack of papers about this thing. All right. I always put this puppy dog in there. This is why am I bothering to be here? Why am I going to listen to this? The site is under active consideration for development as a residential neighborhood. This type of decision will affect everyone in Marquette. Whether you're there or not there, it'll affect everyone. So that's why you're here. Or maybe you just heard I'm a fascinating speaker and you can't wait to hear me talk. And in which case my publicist is doing well. Okay, the location, this is for people who don't know where it is. This was when the plant was thriving. Yeah, it was huge. It was absolutely huge. The east edge was next to Lakeshore Boulevard and Lake Superior. The north edge was Holly Street. That was Cliffs Dow. Before Cliffs Dow, there was another manufacturing site which went all the way across the Dead River to where the power plant is now. The west edge was Presque Isle Road, and the south edge was north of Fair Avenue, because it's kind of a fuzzy line. For a long time, Cleveland Cliffs owned Picnic Rocks and where Memorial Field was and all of that land. But the Cliffs Dow site was there. And again, you can see the haze, you can see the Lombardy poplars, and you can see North Marquette is practically empty. Jim Koski and I went through these slides 2 days ago. He's doing a presentation on North Marquette. Well, you can't do North Marquette without Cleveland CCI, Cliffs Dow, because it was an integral part of the neighborhood for many years. So that's where we are. This is the timeline, and I will talk briefly in the beginning. 1935 forward is Cliffs Dow, but it's wrong to think that the site was only used from 35 forward, because from 1903 to 33, Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company made charcoal and did pig iron manufacturing on that site. So the site has been under environmental attack from 1903 to 33, then 35 to 69. So roughly 65 years of manufacturing at that site, not 30. And Cleveland Cliffs charcoal manufacturing and blast furnace, 1903 to 1933. I'll pass this around. Most people think of charcoal as charcoal briquettes. What Cliffs Dow, or Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company made was hardwood charcoal, which is when you take logs and you cook out everything that isn't the essence of the log, and you use this to make iron because it's pure burning. This is just hardwood charcoal. This is briquettes, which is when you grind up the hardwood charcoal, mix it with a binder, put it in a mold, and press it. And this is what you sell to the public. So hardwood charcoal, charcoal. If you choose to open these Ziploc bags and you get charcoal on you, I'm not paying to have your clothes cleaned, okay? I have personally washed the outside of these bags, so nobody's gonna get dirty if you touch it. But if you open it up, it's on you, okay? There you go.
I've seen this stuff before.
Yeah. The Marquette site was chosen because this type of manufacturing needed a tremendous amount of water. And later on, we'll talk about the existing water pipe from Cliffs Dow that is still in Lake Superior. After 50 years, it's still there. But at the time they were manufacturing at Cliffs Dow, the Cliffs Dow plant took in more water every day than the entire city of Marquette. That's why it was located there. Now, many of you have seen the refurbished charcoal kiln project from the Iron Ore Heritage Trail. You've seen pictures of that. It's a beautiful one charcoal kiln. Well, in 1903, when they were making charcoal to make pig iron, those are rows and rows and rows of charcoal kilns. There's at least 26 in a row, and there's 2 or 3 rows of it. This was industrial grade charcoal making on a scale I was unaware of until I got the hold of these pictures. They made charcoal every day, 24/7. It's a huge operation, and this is, you can see the stacks of wood in the railroad car. They brought in the wood by railroad car. So Cleveland Cliffs bought the site, set up the charcoal manufacturing, and set up the pig iron manufacturing at the same site. So the iron would come down from the mines, the charcoal would be used to melt it, and then it'd be formed into molds called pig iron, and the pig iron went on the boats, which were right next door. Lots of hardwood. That's another reason why it's up here. Hardwood made the best charcoal. Okay? And how do you make charcoal? I didn't know this. Good charcoal is you burn wood at very low oxygen content for many days. And what you burn off the wood is all the stuff that isn't the core product. You burn the resins, the bark, the fibrous stuff, and you get it down to the essence. How many of you have ever had a chimney fire? Okay, that's what happens when you burn raw wood. All of that stuff accumulates. And when you're making pig iron, you need a really hot fire, but you can't have the metal contaminated with what's in raw wood. So you have to burn off the raw wood down to charcoal to be able to make pig iron. But I thought this was, again, another great view of how complicatedly huge these big kilns were. When ignited, the carbon packs more potential energy per ounce than raw wood. It burns steady hot and produces less smoke. All of this is the reasons why you want charcoal rather than raw wood. All right, come on in if you're looking for us. Come on in. He's hiding, okay. People usually do that. It was used by smelters for 11,000 years. They have evidence of charcoal kilns in every prehistoric society. As soon as people learned to work with metal, they learned to melt it. They learned that if they used raw wood, it was bad. So they burned down the raw wood into charcoal and used that for metallurgy. The two professions went hand in hand. Kind of cool, huh? By the way, if you know anybody whose last name is Collier, C-O-L-L-I-E-R-S, that meant their family were charcoal producers. That's where that name came from. I thought that was cool. 3 water pumps, they brought in tons of water. They did cast iron 1903. When they made the charcoal, they let the smoke all go away. Later on, they put the smoke end pipe and they put it under cold temperatures and they condensed the smoke into liquid. And that liquid became the source for other chemicals they got from wood. But they didn't do that right away. For the beginning, they just burned the wood and let everything escape. It wasn't until 1903 or so that they started collecting some of the stuff they were burning off. They recovered 2 things, and here's my big word: pyroligneous acid and wood tars. Wood tars equal bad. If you come away with nothing else from this presentation, wood tar equal bad. Pyroligneous acid equal useful chemicals. So 2 different things. But every time they made charcoal, they made pyroligneous acid and wood tar. Every time. And it's also called wood vinegar. It was a source for many different chemicals. Acetic acid, which is vinegar, acetone, medicinal chemicals as well. And this is where I have really hard to get evidence of wood chemistry since it's so old and it's been replaced by other chemistries. But I found these slides on eBay, and these show ancient chemical equipment used in wood distillation chemistry, which is what we're talking about, what they did to begin with. So you can circulate those around. And I got them on eBay. They're worth about $8 a piece, so don't worry if they get chipped. But the vinegar they made, acetic acid was useful, the acetone, methanol, all these were useful chemicals. So as long as they made materials at that site, it was all useful. Now, interesting enough, the pyroligneous acid was sold as something called liquid smoke, so you could put a barbecue-like flavor into your meat. It wasn't until much later on that people realized you shouldn't put liquid smoke on your meat because the pyroligneous acid had things in it that were bad for people. So a lot of what we're talking about in terms of why they did what they did was based on ignorance. We, unfortunately, in the year 2019, don't have the luxury of ignorance. But they were ignorant. They didn't have a lot of medicines. They didn't have a lot of information. So they used this. Now, wood tar is what's left over. You take 10 pounds of hardwood, you turn it into charcoal, you're going to get 1 pound of wood tar for every 10 pounds of wood you work on. Do the math. They were making charcoal 24/7. They were making wood tar 24/7. And then you talked about the different types of trees. Hardwood tars are better than resinous tars, but hardwood tars, you need hardwood to start with. And later on, people started making charcoal out of any old wood, and that's when charcoal quality declined. But the resinous tars had use, this is again off of eBay. This is logs, a model of logs on a platform. These top logs have been coated with creosote, which is to protect them so they could be used as telephone poles or railway ties or anywhere wood would be outside and exposed to the elements. So this is coated wood, this is uncoated wood. Really hard to find demonstration stuff for this presentation. I was like, I know what they're talking about, but it's hard to see. At the time, they used the crude wood tar as fuel for the boilers. They used it to coat things so that it wouldn't be attacked by the elements or bugs. They tried to use it as much as possible. They had too much of it though, and they started dumping it. And this is one of the reasons why later on you're going to hear me say there's no good map of Cliffs Dow. There was explosion after explosion, and the one in 1916 leveled the entire plant. You've got a tremendous amount of wood, you've got a tremendous amount of fire, you've got a tremendous amount of activity going on under pressure. You're going to have explosions. This is the one that made the news because this leveled the plant. They pretty much had explosions every day of the week, minor ones. But yeah, it was that type of manufacturing, but this one leveled the plant. So even if you had, when you put together a chemical plant, you're trained as an engineer to sketch everything out. Above ground, or above the platform, the ground level, and below the ground. But even if you'd had a good sketch, one good explosion like this drives a whole bunch of stuff into the ground. And they don't try to dig everything up, they smooth it over and build on top of it. That becomes very, very pertinent later on when we start talking about wood tar oozing out of the ground. See, I'm giving you a flavor for the next part of the speech. Wood tar oozing out of the ground. From 1903 to 1933, charcoal was produced only for internal consumption. They didn't make charcoal briquettes to sell them. They needed it to make pig iron. But pig iron started to be the non-favored way of producing iron from 1903 to 1933, and pellets became the favored way. And iron ore pellets are like this, and pig iron is like huge things. And you could load a ship with pellets a lot easier than you had pig iron. So as the need for pig iron went down, the need for charcoal at the plant at that level to fill the boats went down. Wood chemical production, however, shot up during World War I because we were cut off from the German chemical combines that made the global supply of chemicals. See, during World War I, the American chemical industry came into its own because for the first time in the history of the world, you couldn't go to Germany and get chemicals. And that's just an interesting historical fact. It was built for charcoal, pig iron went away, but the plant continued because they needed the chemicals. 1933, the Depression began to deepen and deepen, and the Cleveland Cliffs charcoal manufacturing blast furnace plant was shut down. So 1903, 1933, 30 solid years of wood tar shut down. All of that was done under no environmental constraints whatsoever. No rules about dumping, no concerns about dumping, no people fussing about dumping. This was a time and place when manufacturing along the lake was a given, and everybody dumped everywhere. And in Marquette at that time, sewage treatment consisted of flushing your toilet and having lift pumps pump it to a station that put it out into the lake. At that time, if you had trash and you didn't burn it in your backyard, you took it to an open dump. There's over 90 open dumps that have been capped in Marquette County alone. So I want to give you a flavor for dumping it on the ground, dumping it in the lake. Everything was dumped in the lake. Everything was dumped on the ground. There's an old phrase in chemical engineering, the solution to pollution is dilution. And it was practiced for many years. But okay, it's 33. I just spent the first 20 minutes setting it up, but there was 30 years of manufacturing there before Cliffs Dow. That is really important as you go forward. Now we get into Cliffs Dow. Cliffs Dow Chemical Company had its own railroad. It was a combination, 2/3 the Dow Chemical Company and 1/3 Cleveland Cliffs Iron Mining Company. Cleveland Cliffs supplied the wood and the charcoal expertise, and Dow supplied the chemistry, the chemical expertise, and the nationwide railroad distribution system. Make sense? Cliffs Dow. Now, one of the big issues I've had back and forth is how come I don't have a hyphen on my slide between Cliffs and Dow? Well, if you look there, there's no hyphen between Cliffs Dow on the railroad track. If you look here, there's no hyphen on the employee badge. So I just went with Cliffs Dow, no hyphen. But keep in mind, when it restarted in 35, it was a godsend to the people of Marquette. This was in the height of the Depression. Nobody had any money. The mines all over the Upper Peninsula were shutting down. There were towns that were built around one mine or one locality, and they were all shutting down. People were desperate for work. And what you couldn't cook or make or shoot or fish yourself, You went without. So in 1935, if you went to Cliffs Dow, you got 40 cents an hour. For an 8-hour day or a 10-hour day, that's $3. At the end of the week, you have $15 of cash money. It was a godsend to the people of Marquette. So everything I'm about to tell you about the stench and the debris and the pollution, keep in mind, 40 cents an hour made the difference between being able to stay or having to move on. And it was huge. That stuff in the lower right-hand corner is all stacks of wood. They had 11 miles of railroad track bringing the wood in. They had trains going out every day with chemicals that went all over the world. Plenty of seats up front. It was huge. It was world recognized. When it started, there was about 8 plants in the United States that did wood chemistry. When it ended in '69, it was the last of those. So when it was a going concern, it was huge. And there were stacks and stacks and stacks of wood. Wood was the raw material. Now you make chemicals from oil, you make chemicals from coal. At that time, you made chemicals from wood. The oldest of the chemical arts is from wood. And it employed over 330 workers and about 200 people getting in wood. It was a major employer in the area. And if you couldn't bring the wood to Cliffs Dow sent that truck out. And imagine you were living out in the swamps, you and your family, barely getting by in a tar paper shack. We all know people who lived like that. And there might have been a garden, and you would shoot and trap and do what you could, but you had no cash money. Well, you heard the Cliffs Dow truck was coming on Friday, you and your family would go out and collect all the scrap wood you could find, anything hardwood. It didn't matter, it didn't have to be fancy, it didn't have to be sawmill quality, but you bring it out to the curb in huge areas. The Cliffs Dow truck would stop, you'd load up the truck, and the guy would hand you an envelope based on how much wood you got with cash. If you can imagine that as a godsend of cash money to people who didn't have any, you understand why during the 30 years it was in manufacture, it was supported by the community. Okay? I know that people are giving me the, how could they, it was so bad, and I was like, there weren't a lot of great choices, and this was real. And it made Cliff char briquettes. This is when, instead of making natural charcoal for pig iron manufacture, they went into charcoal briquettes. Cliff char hardwood charcoal was world quality charcoal, best in the country. During World War II, they made specialized charcoal for specialized metallurgical applications of the United States government. The Cliffs Dow plant was so important to the war effort, you could get a deferment from the draft if you worked at Cliffs Dow because it was an urgent war industry. And during the War Department awarded the plant several medals for producing war-needed supplies out of Marquette. So again, this many communities that have an uprising against the local factory because it's a problem. Cliffs Dow was always supported by the community, always recognized as providing good products. These are all, I'm not going to go through these in any order, but Cliff Dow Chemical got a lot of good chemicals out of that wood, and they shipped it all over the world. By the way, you can still get creosote, not in the United States. I bought some on the internet. It came from India in a little bottle, and it was used for dental work. See, at the time, they thought that the wood liquids had some medicinal value. So they would, there weren't a lot of doctors around, so you would doctor yourself with wood chemical products, and one of them was creosote. You can still buy it in India for root canal pain. I wouldn't recommend you use it, but you can still buy it. And this is the money slide. That's 10 pounds of hardwood on the left. Charcoal, you got 6 pounds. Hardwood tars, 1.22 pounds, every 10 pounds of charcoal. Acetic acid and that pyrolignis liquid. And the liquor, you got acetic acid, wood spirits, which is methanol, but every time you made charcoal, you made wood tar. You couldn't make charcoal without making wood tar, which is why there's so much of it. Hardwood tar was a byproduct. It was burned in the plant, but there was so much produced it was dumped. It was dumped in the Cliffs Dow dump off of County Road 550, dumped on the site itself next to the Holly tar ditch, and dumped wherever on the site property it wouldn't be in the way. It wasn't a secret. I've got a 4-page document from R.W. Jennings, the last president of Cliffs Dow, where he went through the location and depth of every tar dump on the property. He knew where all of them were. At the time, it was viewed as a nuisance because you could sink into it and it would get on your clothing, so they covered it with sawdust. 6 to 12 feet of sawdust were put on top of it so you could walk over it. But it wasn't a secret. It was there. And then President Jenner is quoted as saying, when he set up the plant, when they worked on it, they did whatever they wanted. There was no government intervention whatsoever. The city, the state, the federal government, there was no one. The Environmental Protection Agency didn't start up till 1969. The state started to get involved in the mid-60s, but at the time, and all the while it was running, there were no rules. Remember, Marquette didn't have sewage treatment until 52. So it wasn't an outlier. It was pretty much the way everything was run. No regulations. Nobody broke any rules is what I'm trying to say when they ran Cliffs Dow. This is another thing. There's still a water pipe out there. It used more water than any other part of Marquette used. You think about that now and what an effect it would have on the water table. It used it every day. And when they shut it down, they left that intake water pipe out there. It's still there. That's of concern. And then this is an aerial view of the plant. And
Excuse me?
Yes, sir.
Where was the water returned to in the distillation process?
In
the distillation process, you distill whatever you're cooling, and then that water is cooled and sent back to the source.
If it was usable water, it was recycled through the plant. If it was unusable water, it was pumped out into the lake or pumped down into ground wells on the property. I've got an anonymous letter. There's an anonymous letter writer who's been writing to the state of Michigan for 30 years telling people that Cliffs Dow used to have deep water wells on the property they would pump wastewater into. Okay. Again, I picked this slide from the Regional Historical Site. If you look up at the top, you can see Picnic Rocks. You can see the white sand. There's a beach. You could actually walk from the shore to Picnic Rocks. But you can also see the end of Magnetic Street. They called it Lakeshore Inc. It was where they made parts for ore boats. So right next to Cliffs Dow, there was another manufacturing site, which is now condos, Lakeshore Inc., which they made metal parts for ore boats. That was another 24/7 operation. And when they made those condos there, they did a lot of remediation of that lawn, but they didn't have wood tar there. They just had metalworking fluids in the ground. So that whole area stretching along the lake there was all manufacturing. And I found these pictures online. This is what the inside of the plant looked like. It was considered state-of-the-art. People came from all over the world to look at Cliffs Dow, but these are retorts. They put the water and the wood in there, cooked the heck out of it, collected liquid, pyroligneous acid, other liquids, and started the process of getting charcoal. And there's another view of it as well. What can I tell you? It was an old-style chemical manufacturing plant that was only as clean as it needed to be. In the lower left-hand corner there, there's a man on that platform for perspective. These were huge facilities. Okay, Cliffs Dow has visitors from Russia. Remember I told you it was state-of-the-art? People from all over the world came to Marquette to look at Cliffs Dow manufacturing. Wood chemistry was older, it was being replaced by oil chemistry, but there was a lot of places in the world that still used wood chemistry. So all sorts of technical people, flew up here in the middle of winter, froze, and went out to Cliffs Dow and thought, oh Lord, I hope we don't have to freeze to make wood chemistry. But every time they came up, it was a big deal. It was reported in the Mining Journal. Now, this is a little side note here. Cliffs Dow was full of really smart people that did really good work. And if you read underneath that first patent number, you'll know who Al Camilli was. Al Camilli was the father of Carol Camilli, who was our family babysitter. He lived across the street from us. Never once, when I remember my parents talking about the Camillis, did they mention that he worked at Cliffs Dow or that he was an inventor. Gentleman who lived next to him, Woodbridges, also worked at the plant. So it was very common to have 2 or 3 Cliffs Dow people on each street in Marquette. It was a huge employer. And I put these slides in there, first of all, I'm a patent attorney, but second of all, to let you know that being state-of-the-art, they kept working on making wood chemistry better. The last patent on this page is hilarious. Combustible gel was a type of charcoal starter. One of the inventors was George Greminger, who was the guy who worked with Ethicel, which was what made the combustible gel thicker. He worked for Dow Chemical in 1958. I started with Dow in 79, and I worked with George Greminger. So just when you think the world is a huge place, there's all these connections, okay? And then they continued through 67 to make patents there. I don't want people to think that I'm trash-talking Cliffs Dow. That's not what this is about. They were world-class chemical producers at a time when this was a recognized way to make charcoal and to make chemicals. Everything that's happened since then is because we are less ignorant than we used to be. But at the time, it was world-class. It was also very, very dangerous. Everybody who lives in Marquette knows that the most dangerous occupation is underground mining, followed closely by shipping, railway, forestry, take your pick. Cliffs Dow was no different. This was closed vessel entry. Gentleman, supervisor went in, found out 2 of his guys were at the bottom of the acetic acid tank cleaning it, and they collapsed. He went down to try to get him out. There was no oxygen. He collapsed and died. His name was Gerald B. Johnson. He was 29 years old. He had 4 children. There was no way you could make manufacturing safe. It was dangerous. Now when you do closed vessel entry, the last place I worked, DSM, Dutch company, the person who goes into the vessel is in a full body harness. There's a mechanical lift that will lift his entire body weight out of the plant, out of the tank, without anybody having to go down there. He's in constant 2-way communication with a spotter on top of the tank. Meanwhile, the spotter is in constant communication with the supervisor for the job, who's in touch with the plant emergency services. So you never have one person in a tank, and you never have them go in without a full harness and somebody on top to flip the switch to drag them out. We got better at this, is what I'm saying. But it was dangerous, and that was part of the reality of the chemistry. If you started at Cliffs Dow, or you worked there in the summertime, you did charcoal work, they put you in the charcoal plant. And did you work there, sir?
No, my friends did.
Yeah, they put the #1 job young men did. They wanted the summertime work. Their dad could get them in to Cliffs Dow. They bagged charcoal. And they bagged charcoal.
Football players.
And they bagged charcoal. And they bagged charcoal. I had so many comments on, I put on, send me your memories of Cliffs Dow. Well, I started at the Red Owl that summer and it paid $1 an hour, and Cliffs Dow paid $1.87 an hour, and by God, we earned it, because I never lifted so many blank bags of charcoal in my entire life, and that stuff stinks, and I couldn't get off my clothes, and I ruined 3 pairs of, it was like charcoal. It was a heavy, manual-induced plant. There was no automatic fills, there were no automatic lifts, there was no automatic processing. But if you were a young man looking for summer work, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but you couldn't get into the mines, you couldn't get into CCI unless someone in your family already worked there. So if you wanted a summer job and wanted decent wages, Red Owl was $1 an hour, Cliffs Dow was $1.87 an hour. Do the math. But you earned every ounce of it. There was no clean summer jobs in Marquette. And then it was state-of-the-art. How can I say it? The plant itself looked old and dirty, and there was a constant overwhelming smell of burnt tar. An acrid, thick smoke that caused you to roll up the windows of your car as you drove by on the way to the island. Anybody who tells you Cliffs Dow, if they were there, they wrinkle their nose. And they just, some of them cough. And they're not being, it's what you remember about Cliffs Dow. It was horrible.
And it's people that work there.
And it never stopped.
In their vehicles, something like that.
And there were so many sad stories of people who talked about families working at Cliffs Dow and then listing the number of people in their family who passed from cancer. Now, this is not a speech about the medical effects of working in industry. This was a fact of life. Why
ever get any money from the company for the death of their spouse?
I would imagine that there was a death benefit. It wasn't reported in the paper that way. Usually, I mean, I worked at Dow at 79 and there was an accident on site and you got money if you got killed in an accident on time, but that was 20 years later. Not enough to raise a family on.
You got the money from your fellow employees, there was this
The union,
contributed.
yeah, the union would have had something. There was a union at Cliffs Dow. There was a nice lady yesterday let me borrow the Cliffs Dow suggestion box, and in there was an article in the 1960s. The union was negotiating for a 15-cent an hour raise, and the Cliffs Dow had offered them 2 cents an hour. And so they went on strike, and I think they settled for about 4 cents an hour. It was not lucrative. It was never, you can never pay people enough to risk their lives. Even so, it didn't pay as well as the might. But it was work. And Cliff Dow makes vitally needed chemicals for American industry. They're not exaggerating. Those guys are log people. Excuse me. There's a better word for it than log people, but about 1/3 of the people who worked at Cliff Dow handled wood. That was their whole job. Bring the wood in, move the wood, dry the wood, move it from this part to that part, and then when it was done, move the charcoal. That was a big thing, was the logging, getting the wood to the plant, never running out of wood. Even in the wintertime when nothing moved, never, remember that Dow truck going around never running out of wood. And this isn't a puff piece, this was recognized. And now take your time and read this. It was dated 2009. What they call EGLE now has been getting a letter from this person and others like him for every year for the past 30 years. Okay? Keep in mind that people knew what they were doing. It wasn't against the law, but they were, commonsensically speaking, they were concerned. Once Cliffs Dow shut down, the concerns grew even greater. But this is a matter of the files at EGLE. And then, in the 1960s, the state of Michigan, like many other places, woke up and started environmental regulations. And R.W. Jenners is quoted as saying, at that time, there was no way we could retrofit that plant to meet even 1/10 of the regulations that were coming down. So they found a buyer. Royal Oak Charcoal acquired it in '68. It was a 50-50 partnership with 2 other plants. And it was mostly interested in the charcoal business, not the chemical business. And the first thing it did, of course, was build better offices for the administration. People had great hope once they built a better office building for the administration. And it shut a year later.
And the new offices are still there.
Well, it shut a year later because the market for all the chemicals that they got from the wood went down. At the same time, the price of charcoal stayed the same. And then at that time, charcoal was being changed from this hardwood charcoal to, do any of you know Kingsford charcoal? You know the story behind Kingsford charcoal? No. Our dear friend Henry Ford owned a tremendous amount of the Upper Peninsula forest lands because he used it to manufacture his automobiles. And he was a terrible worrier about waste. And in his manufacturing plants, he had leftover wood. So he contacted a buddy of his in the Upper Peninsula to take that wood and turn it into charcoal. And that's where Kingsford charcoal came from. It used to be called Ford charcoal. Well, Kingsford charcoal is left over from the Henry Ford days of manufacturing. Yeah, it is. This is like, I mean, I love the history of chemistry, but this just blew my mind how many people were involved in charcoal. June 4th, 1969, the closing of the company was announced. Do any of you go to the commission meetings regularly? They're fussing and fuming right now because We Energies shut down their power plant and the tax base is going down and we're all going to die. I'm not being facetious. It's a very serious thing and people have lost their jobs and my heart goes out to them. But if you listen at the commission, it's like, we have to do this because we're losing We Energies. Well, when the plant went under, it was the largest employer in the city of Michigan, City of Marquette. 270 people, 275 people, heads of households lost their jobs. Plus all those people out in the wood who no longer had a market for their wood. It was a huge blow to the city of Marquette. When you talk about how you keep a city going, when Cliffs Dow went down, it hurt. Nonetheless, the city of Marquette continued. So my personal philosophy of this is if we can survive losing Cliffs Dow, we can survive losing We Energies. We need to remember that we've been through horrible things before and survived. Now, it's taken us 45 minutes to get to the point where Cliffs Dow shut down. And you're saying, what could possibly have happened since then? It's been 50 years since the plant shut down. 50 years. And it's never stopped being a concern. And I'm going to run through this briskly. I'm not trying to close down any conversation. What happened since the summer, they used to have old buildings on there. They have now taken down all the buildings on the Cliff Dow property that were associated with the plant itself. The entrance to Cliff Dow used to be off of the corner of Wright Street and Presque Isle. They now have extended Wright Street all the way through the old site. But at that time, that was the entrance building for a long time. There's 3 major areas of development since then. You can see my high-tech work here. At the top, the BioLife Plasma Services building, everybody's familiar with that. Beautiful manicured lawn. No secret, but that's the parking lot we launched the drone from. It was very quiet that day. And to the other end, you've got the NMU athletic parking lots, the soccer fields there. And in the center, you have the land for proposed development. So when people talk about Cliffs Dow Site, all through the history since 1969, there's correspondence in the file fussing about, well, you don't mean the 9 acres that's a Superfund site, you mean this, because we really don't want to be associated with the Superfund site. Yeah, it gets like that. So when I went to EGLE, which is across the street from where I swim at the apartment complex, and next to the Shopko behind Office Depot, went out there on an FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and they knew I was coming and they knew I wanted to see the documents for Cliffs Dow. So this is the first table of documents. This is the older stuff. Second table of documents. Third table of documents. Since I did this about 7 weeks ago, I've since gotten 2 emails from EGLE saying these additional documents have come in, and do you want them? And I went, yes, please. So the EGLE, the state, has never stopped being involved with Cliffs Dow since the plant shut down. It has never been off their radar. And I've seen some surprise in people's faces, but that's the truth. It's never been off their radar. I don't know how to tell these stories because people tell, well, they took care of that. They cleaned that all up. There were 2 Superfund sites. Does anybody know what the Superfund was? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Well, the federally funded program to clean up what the government determined to be very polluted sites in chemical plants and petroleum product plants being the basic.
He's right. He did very well. In 1969, a Republican administration started the Environmental Protection Agency. Honest to God, it's truthful. First thing the EPA did is contact the agency in each of the 50 states and said, send us a list of your 50 worst chemical petroleum pollution issues. Send us your list. So the state went through their problem areas and sent the federal government a list. Cliffs Dow was responsible for item number 6 and item number 30 on the list sent to the federal government. There were 2 Superfund cleanups related to Cliffs Dow. It did not clean up the entire site. That's the one thing I'm sorry I have to tell you. It did not clean up the entire site. Anybody know what they're doing out on Holly Street this weekend? Anybody drive by, see those huge gray pipes yesterday? They're rerouting the Holly tar ditch. They don't want that water going straight into the lake anymore because that's still a point source for pollution. So they're running the water from that part of the road, underneath the road, over into the area that drains into the Dead River. Yes, ma'am?
That's what I was gonna ask, so it's going into the Dead River, which is gonna go back into the lake?
Yes, however, there is a very logical reality here. The Holly tar ditch was on the worst part of the site where they dumped stuff on site. I have a description from a gentleman who grew up in North Marquette. He said that ditch was full of 4 to 6 feet of tar every day and then 3 feet of water on top of it. So it was always pushing tar out into the water. Well, that end of the plant where Plasma BioLife was a Superfund site, which they cleaned up. However, the Superfund worked like this. If you got a letter from the federal government saying, greetings, you have been identified as the owner of this property and there's a Superfund issue here, you either clean it up to our satisfaction or we'll clean it up and send you a bill. The company would always go to the government and say, we'll clean it up, and then the negotiation began. It was never clean it up. It was how much or how little can we clean up in order to get the federal government to say it's okay. The negotiation over these cleanups was dramatic. The files are this thick. And it was a question of, oh, you looked for this, but you should have looked for that, or there's a whole bunch of correspondence in the library right here saying, you're saying we have to spend $7.4 million, and now you've upped it to 11.9. You're basing it on erroneous details. That chemical you're worried about is only in this part of the site. And I mean, it's really, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic in the sense that they were nickel and diming the cleanup. They never cleaned it up. Unfortunately, when you listen to this in commission chambers, you get phrases like, well, that was cleaned up, or it's getting better. And I'm sitting there going, So, hikers reported encountering large amounts of tar in the woods off of County Road 550. Really, Cliffs Dow had been trucking tar out into a depression out there for 30 years and dumping it. It was an open secret. It was out in the woods, nobody knew, nobody cared. Hikers got their feet
Show
wet.
the people where the Dow site is there, because it isn't marked.
Well, bear with me,
You know, but just kind of run your finger around so they know how close we are.
This is the Dow site here. The site out in the woods was out here, out of County Road 550. So the one Superfine site was out County Road 550. The other one, the Holly tar ditch, was on the property next to the lake. Okay? There's no joking about this. It was a horrendous cleanup. And for one manufacturing plant to have 2 Superfund issues was horrible.
Okay,
Yes,
I don't get, okay, they're gonna reroute the water.
we're back at the Holly tar ditch, yes.
Yep, they're gonna reroute the water to the Dead River.
You're going to reroute the water through a field, a huge field that has natural aquifer cleaning mechanisms.
Okay, so
In
that
terms
will
of,
clean it up?
if it goes straight into the lake, it's just going to go straight in with whatever it has.
Right,
If it goes under the road into that field behind Clark Lambros Park, you know where that parking lot is? There's a tremendous amount of foliage and rocks and other things for it to be splashed around and naturally, the word is bioremediated, but basically it gets cleaned up in the natural order of things, so when it hits the Dead River, it's not as polluted.
so would that land then be polluted,
Yes.
if that's where it ends up?
I'm sorry, I'm hearing yeses. Who's saying yes?
I'm saying it goes through there and hits the rock and the trees and the whatever's there, okay, and it cleans up the water enough for the water to go in the lake. Now, is that property contaminated?
I can't give you a simple answer, so I'm going to sit here very carefully and say some of the contaminants in the water will naturally stick to what's underground there.
That's
Others of that will be absorbed by plants and go into the plant and grow above the surface. That's called phytoremediation. It's a known thing. If you run contaminants through certain plants, they'll be taken up into the plants, and that's how the ground gets.
So don't eat a mushroom or a berry from there, huh?
All I know is, I'm giving this speech in October of 2019, and they're doing a project this week, Monday, to try to reroute the water away from the Holly Tar Ditch, because 50 years after they shut the plant, that's still a point source. That was why I'm including it in this, because they're trying to get that land in shape for development, and they can't get it past the state rules, and I'll tell you more about that as we go on.
That's what
That's why they're cleaning up the Holly Tar Ditch in the year 2019, okay?
Excuse me,
Yes, ma'am.
who's cleaning up?
City
The
Marquette.
Okay, so is the EPA involved in that? I know like about 5 slides back, you had that for the last 46 years, that area has been monitored. Who's it been monitored by?
At different points, different people. When it was Superfund, it was the federal government. The state has been involved since '69. The City of Marquette has been involved. And in '97, they took ownership of the property and they got super involved. Okay?
So it's just the city of Marquette, it's not like.
City of Marquette and the
EPA
state.
is
It's the
in-
City of Marquette and the state.
So they have people that are.
The City of Marquette and the
educated
state.
in cleaning
The
things up.
gentleman from the state, I sorry to interrupt you, I'm trying to guide you to the answer you want. The gentleman from the state is named Steve Harrington. He's been with this project for over 20 years. He's really good. Any document that's signed by the state with his name on it, he's intimately familiar with what's going on at the site.
And does he have training in this type of thing? I mean, what are his
He's
credentials?
employed by EGLE, which is the state agency.
Okay.
I don't know his background in terms of his art. I've read his letters. I have never found one thing in any of his letters that causes me concern. If he talks about a number or a value or a situation, he's dead on in terms of the chemistry, the statute, and the concerns. I have great respect for the man, is what I'm saying.
Okay, so is he involved in the Holly Tar cleanup?
Involved in, I have not seen documents from him being involved in that. The Holly Tar cleanup, the city initiated. And I think, I didn't get the city documents because I didn't want to overlap with what they'd already sent to the state. So you're taking me beyond my area of concern. But it would be a lovely question to take to the commission Monday night. They're going to meet at 6, and I'm going to encourage all of you to go for a lot of reasons. But right now, they're cleaning up the Holly Tar Ditch. Okay. All right? Let me stand up. A nice break there. Okay, so what much to our surprise, do you remember that great scene in Casablanca where Major Renault says, I am shocked, truly shocked to find out there's gambling here, and the croupier brings over his winnings, and he says, oh, thank you very much, and sticks them in his pocket. We are shocked, truly shocked to find out that if you dump wood tar into the woods for over 60 years, it doesn't go away. And that people who aren't familiar with it say, I don't want this here. And now you have the Environmental Protection Agency, and you got your first Superfund cleanup, which is the Cliffs Dow dump. That's what they called it. It's really important that you understand there were 2 cleanups. The EPA worked on the cleanup off of the Cliffs Dow dump, and it worked on the Holly Tar Ditch cleanup. But it was never a comprehensive cleanup of the Cliffs Dow site. That's something that people have a really hard time understanding. Not because they're not being silly, they just, well, I knew there was a cleanup. They cleaned up the Cliffs Dow dump, 20,000 cubic yards, wood tar, contains benzene, xylene, chloroform, phenol, and other organics. The amount of paperwork EGLE has on this is beyond belief. The amount that's online, the file online, they've given you the link to that. It's 10 times what EGLE has.
Where did they put it?
They shipped it to a disposal site in Utah. There was no good place to save it.
Move the pollution.
Dear friends, all I can tell you is if you're a chemical engineer now, you're trained to reduce the amount of pollution, the amount of non-productive things you make. You would never allow a project for every 10 pounds of processing to create 1 pound of waste. It would never get past the board because every ounce of waste has to be accounted for. But remember, for 60 years, there was none of this. So you got your first Superfund cleanup, which is closed. According to the EPA, it's closed. I've had several people tell me, you know, my friends live out in that area, and there's still wood tar out there. And I would say, I'm not surprised. You have to bring it to the attention of EGLE and let them know. EGLE is the name of the state agency now that does that. The second Superfund cleanup. Cliffs Dow on-site waste disposal, AKA the Bogland parcel. A little bit of humor here. Since the second the plant shut down, people have tried to develop it. Some local people, who I won't name, bought the entire site. And they tried to get it developed. They went to the planning commission and somebody from Dow stood up and said, this part of the property was contaminated, and the planning commission turned them down. This was back in the 1970s, 80s. And so these two gentlemen promptly sued Dow Chemical for revealing to the planning commission that it was polluted. Anyway, they call it the Bogland parcel because they separated it out of the rest of what they owned because they wanted to separate it because it was the worst contaminated, but the rest of it they thought they could still develop. The Bogland parcel, the Holly tar ditch, was cleaned up using Superfund money. 20,000 cubic yards. Property was later sold for $1. Keep in mind, it was sold for $1, it's now the location of BioLife Plasma Services. Yes, ma'am?
BioLife does what?
Plasma. You go there and sell.
How do you know that plasma is okay?
Put your body. It's your blood.
Excuse me. It's a reasonable question. The zoning for bioplasma doesn't contemplate active contact with the ground or the groundwater. They get their water from city mains. Well, this whole area, nobody uses the groundwater or has contact with the ground. And that's the only answer I can give to you. But that was part of the setup for the plasma. The city bought this land and sold it for $1, which is, I'm sorry, but if you're going to try to make money in the city of Marquette by buying land and selling it, there's a long track record of not making any money doing that. So bioplasma and the Holly tar ditch are at one end, and now they're rerouting the Holly tar ditch and getting rid of that source that goes out into the lake. By the way, if you're looking for the monitoring wells where they're looking for this stuff, it's the yellow pipes. On the way out to the island, inside the property of Cliffs Dow, all over that area, there's 3 yellow pipes or 2 yellow pipes next to each other. That's a monitoring well. Okay, so we had our cleanup. We're good to go. After the Cliffs Dow Chemical Company plant was closed, strong objectionable odors emanating from the site year-round. Residents and users of the beach and the bike path continually complained to EGLE into the city. It stinks. Remember that terrible odor?
It did.
It has never gone away. From Facebook, Friday, September 27th, I put out, tell me your stories about Cliffs Dow. Just want to mention that the other day after we had rained for several days, I was stopped at the corner of Presque Isle and Wright Street and was smelling that old familiar Cliffs Dow odor. This becomes critically important in any future development. They're talking about the concept of vapor barriers. A vapor barrier is what you put in an area to stop bad smells. Say, for example, this bag, this is activated carbon, by the way, that's good wood. That's what you put in a water treatment system to absorb contaminants. There's differences in types of wood. That's good wood. That's about $80 worth of activated carbon. That's very expensive wood. But say that was full of skunk juice, and you didn't want that odor. You could enclose that bag and stop the odor. But suppose I opened that bag and shifted it all around the room here. How are you going to stop the odor? Shut the door and don't let anybody in. So I am personally and professionally, I'm a chemical engineer by training, I'm personally and professionally skeptical of the idea of vapor barriers reducing the Cliffs Dow smell. And I'll tell you more later on about how when they sink a new well, they're encountering that odor, they're encountering it on land, they're encountering it at the bottom of the lake. Every sample they bring up still smells of Cliffs Dow. Okay? This is the Marquette City Commission in 1996-97. The names are M. Cameron House, Stu Bradley, Emily Coyne, Frank Scioto, Martha Conley, Jack Ledbetter, and Jim Schneider. And why have I listed their names here? They were the decision makers on the next chapter in the post-manufacturing phase of the Cliffs Dow site. Up until 97, the property was back in the hands of Dow Chemical and Cleveland Cliffs, who came to the city and said, we'll sell it to you for $1. The only catch is you have to take on all the environmental liability. Yeah. Little side note for anybody, I'm currently running for city commission. It makes a difference who you put on the city commission. There's all sorts of reasons why and why not to vote for someone, but it makes a difference. These people thought they were getting a deal and doing right by the people of Marquette. You judge for yourself if that's true. They bought it with the understanding they took on all the liability, so they didn't do a BEA. What's a BEA? A baseline environmental assessment. It's a form you fill out with all the information you know about property. You give it to the state, and you're not responsible for the cleanup. They didn't do it. So the city of Marquette is legally responsible for that site and the environmental issues on that site, and has been since '97. Did I mention there's an election coming up for city commission? It's really comforting to say, well, it's no big deal, everything works out in the end. About a month after this deal went down, it was revealed in the paper that it meant the city had absolute liability. And one of the commissioners was quoted at the time saying, oh, we didn't know that, we gotta get rid of this deal. That's not how it worked. So they didn't do their baseline environmental assessment, so under the law of the state, they're responsible for the cleanup. And what did? What they've been doing since day one, they're trying to sell the property, they're trying to make some money, they're trying to make it valuable, taxable land. So in '98, they sold some of it to Northern Michigan University. Any of you connected with Northern? Such a shame. I invited Northern to come. I invited the Northwind reporter to come. This is kind of relevant to you guys. Northern wanted to buy some of the property for parking lots and for the soccer fields. You know that park where you're driving out to the island to the left, there's the band field and the soccer fields, and you're behind the dome? They bought the property. They bought the southern 23.35 acres of the former Cliffs Dow Site. They did one of the remedial action plans to address contaminated soils. There's no joke here. They found arsenic, chromium, lead, and nickel in that ground. These are toxic heavy metals. One of the things I've told to the commission many times is when I went to Dow, straight out of Michigan Tech, and I was in Midland headquarters, and they'd say, where are you from? I said, Marquette, Michigan. I was taken aside 3 different times by 3 different people, older men, who said, you don't go near that Cliffs Dow site. I said, nobody does, it stinks. He said, no, you don't go near that. I said, no one does. He said, you have to understand, when I worked at Dow, whatever age, whenever they had something that was too toxic to go into the system for cleanup in Midland, they would ship it up to Marquette and have someone pour it on the ground there.
Oh, jeez.
Now, no rules against it, no law was broken, no way to tell what's there, because they don't keep a record of what they dumped on the ground. But in this particular type of soil, they found arsenic, chromium, lead, and nickel. Yes, sir?
Mickey, is there a baseline that you know of what all, if anything has ever been done on research as far as finding arsenic, chromium, lead, nickel, and all these other contaminants, that would be a natural product of this area? Would there be a baseline ever established for that?
You'd like to think there had been. I haven't encountered it yet. It'd be a good question for the state geologist. The fact is, most of the underground soil work has been done by the mines looking for things. It hasn't been done by people looking for environmental issues, unless they were trying to build on it. So I don't know what the baseline is. Okay?
Would the source of that be from the trees?
I don't know. It is highly unlikely that a tree would have arsenic, chromium, lead, and nickel in it
Unless in
naturally.
the process of,
What happened was the state required a remediation plan. They knew that Northern wasn't going to build houses there, and they knew that people were going to use it for parking lots
yeah,
and athletic fields. They weren't
Yeah.
digging, they weren't gardening, they weren't
yeah.
building basements there. So the state plan.
David, to the circulation
Oh,
desk,
jeez.
please. David?
I thought I hit the wrong button here. I mean, I turned off the sound on the machine. I don't want you to hear my mail, but it's like,
This is God talking.
okay, this was the approved plan, and I'm not knocking this plan. It makes sense. They had to clear off all the vegetation because the vegetation would absorb some of those chemicals, remove the debris, they graded the property, and then they placed a protective soil layer, minimum of 1 foot thick across the entire parcel. Then they covered that with fresh grass, fresh ground, fresh everything. So for the first layer, it was fresh dirt, and then they had a 1 foot thick barrier between the up above and down below. They also had to promise, and I've seen these letters, once a year, this Northern certifies to EGLE that they've done no digging on the site, once a year, okay? They even had to certify and have an EGLE inspector come out when they built the tower so people could look on the soccer fields, because there was a little bit of digging now, they had to certify they didn't pierce the cap. So the state is on top of this, they're watching it. What I found out, Lois Lane, junior reporter, found out, there's supposed to be a deed restriction that requires permanent markers telling people not to dig in that area, not to use the groundwater. So I went out to that area on a sunny afternoon looking for that deed restriction. You can see here, the deed was recorded in light, you know, I got this from the paperwork, and I couldn't find a piece of paper saying that deed restriction had been lifted. So I went out to the soccer fields, and I found signs saying no dogs, and you can't have public use. And then what really concerned me is that's a water pump and that's a hose. And if they're pumping groundwater to water the lawn or anything, that's something they're not supposed to do. So I tried to get the Northwind reporter interested in this. She suggested I contact the university and let them know what happened. And I'm like, isn't that your job? But again, Northern's supposed to have signage. They do say non-potable water, do not drink. Well, that's a lot of help. It doesn't tell you what it needs to tell you, which is don't dig and don't drink. So Northern needs to look into this, and I keep trying to get Northern interested, and I've invited them and invited them and invited them, and they haven't shown up yet. So I'm hoping when this video gets posted, and I send a little note to people saying, you might want to look at this, that they do actually look at it. But anyway, if you have a child running on those soccer fields, I think the remediation is adequate. However, knowing people the way they are, if you see somebody digging out there, it's not adequate. And I'm not being funny when I say that, but Northern, developed that area, so you got BioLife to the north and Northern to the south, and it's being in the middle now. 97, the City of Marquette took over. They sold land to Northern, BioLife got developed, they wanted to develop the Cliffs Dow Site. Beginning in 2008 or so, water samples showed chemicals leaving the site and entering Lake Superior. 40 years after the plant had shut down, which meant there was chemicals on the site that were still capable of being leached out into the water. That's what happens when you dump chemicals for 65 years and you don't clean it up. The state of Michigan, in a series of letters, notified and notified and notified the City of Marquette. Emphasis on the regular letter, registered mail, return receipt requested, and fourth letter, which is, we really need you to pay attention to this now. It was that level of correspondence, and if you read letters for a living like I do, the state couldn't get the city's attention. Until finally, and this one's gonna break your heart, the city manager, Judy Aquila, wrote back in 2008. This is page 1 of the city response to the state. They called them and said, we've hired Tri-Media consultants to look into this for us. They're going to be the ones doing the work. They're going to be copied on everything, and we think they're going to be good people. We're trying to work on an interim revised response plan, which is what you've been asking us to do for several times, and we're starting on that, but this is the one that'll break your heart. We sincerely appreciate your patience involving this site. There's a understatement. When the city purchased this property in '97, city administrators told the commission that the environmental issues at the location were deemed to be minimal. That is a constant theme since '97, is that the city has been told or has been telling other people, no problem, minimal, de minimis, not a big issue. It was a long time ago, no big deal. Well, none of these individuals are employed by the city now. You think? You think they finally realized that it wasn't minimal? The city does not negate our obligation to ensure the public safety. The light bulb goes off. We are in a heap of trouble here, folks. We bought this property, we were told it was minimal. It's not minimal. And these chemicals you're talking about in the lake are serious. And it's like the light bulb went off, and this poor lady had to say, we got it now. We're gonna start looking at this. We're committed to diligently pursue the response activities required. You'd like to think. So that was Judy Aquila. So Cliffs Dow deal revisited. They went back to the original contract, trying to find a way to get Dow or Cleveland Cliffs to pay for some of this. And this one story was in the paper, nothing since. My whole attitude toward this is that the city was lied to at the time of the transaction, and that that should be grounds to negate the original contract, but no one's asked me. But if I were on the commission, that would be the tact I would take, and I would go down to Dow or Cleveland Cliffs and explain there was lies told. And if that didn't work, I'd publicly shame them, because what they left us with, no one should be left with. State and city go back and forth. Yes, some contaminants are decreasing, however, the concentrations of contaminants are increasing. And you're saying it doesn't make any sense. They're not dumping there anymore. Shouldn't it all be going down? Wood tar is like really thick roofing tar. Have you all seen barrels of roofing tar? When it's hot, you can pour it, but when it's not, you can't. So 9 months of the year, the wood tar doesn't move. 3 months of the year, it shifts and moves as the water shifts and moves, as the ground shifts and moves during the summer months. So what happens is maybe one chunk, that chair is wood tar, that stuff decreases. And so that's good. Well, then the next summer, the chunk next to it gets into a place where the water hits it more and this level increases. There's so much of it on the property. There is no one coherent way of saying, like if you fill this room with wood tar, eventually it would all be gone. But it wasn't just one room, it was all throughout the site and different spots in different places. So they go back and forth. There are also recent increases in the concentration of some contaminants in groundwater at other locations, and they've named the wells. So 5-fold increases. So this is why I went hysterical the last time the city commission had a meeting, and the planning commission note said that the city guy said it's getting better. And I'm sitting there going, no, it isn't. It's going up and down and sideways, but it's not getting better. I've got about 15 more minutes of slides, and then we can have a discussion. I know you're all busy, but this is the meat of the presentation.
Okay.
I couldn't start with this because if you didn't know what pyrolignis acid was, I'd have to stop and take you back there. Anybody remember 2011? Anybody remember the horror science fiction movie, The Blob?
Yeah.
Okay, well the Blob was pink, and it went across people and killed them. Well, in 2011, the people who lived in the apartments on Presque Isle reported to the landlady that there was tar in the parking lot. The landlady smelled it and called the city and said, Cliffs Dow. And the city came out and went, Cliffs Dow, but it's off the property line. They didn't know what had happened. So it was really bad. It was blue wood tar. That's what it looked like. It's toxic, and there was lots of it. And so they went through the site. They don't have a map, but they went through the site grid by grid, and they found it's been oozing out of the parking lot there, and they found an underground storage area, a rectangle like 2 of these tables long and about 8 feet deep, full of wood tar, wood, and other debris. It wasn't an official disposal site, it was just there. And there was a pipe leading from that to the apartment complex. And over time, it just migrated. And in the summer of 2011, it came up. If that doesn't frighten you, I don't know what fear is. So the city, there's a video on YouTube. If you type in Cliffs Dow, you can see a front-end loader digging up the ground because they had to dig it up. And when they dug it up, they found this. During the search for the source of the wood tar, they found underground passages, underground tunnels, underground labyrinth of structures full of old pipes, rusty pipes, debris, you name it. Remember, there was no map. there were explosions, and layer upon layer upon layer of grief. So they figured out what had happened, and what they did was the minimal cleanup necessary. They dug up from the apartment complex to where the big rig of, and they dug that all up and shipped it off to Utah. They did not dig up the entire site and take all of that down to where there was no more structure. Does that make sense? Because you're all nodding your head.
Well,
When they had a problem, they cleaned up that area. They didn't clean up the rest of it. 2011, that's 8 years ago. Bad smell, a side effect of cleanup. Look at the faces there. Those are relatively young people, and they're like, this is horrible. I opened the window of my apartment and it reeks of this stuff. Another guy said, my clothes all stink of this. I have to hang them out on the line at my mother-in-law's house. It was horrible. That smell, if you grew up with it, you didn't, I don't say it didn't bother you, but you weren't afraid of it. You knew what it was. People who don't know what it was, it really, really bothered them, as it should. It's got a lot of things in it you don't want to smell. And then after the Cliffs Dow Chemical Company, tremendous interest in developing the property due to it being a prime location, balanced again knowledge of unknown levels of soil pollution and measured amounts of contaminants in the groundwater and lake water. This is more of the stuff they found when they dug it up. If you spent 5 years on that site with the best equipment and the best earth movers and the best team, you might at the end of 5 years get maybe the top foot of it down to where you weren't surprised anymore. City installed about 50 monitoring wells on the property since 2009. They're sending reports to the state all the time. That's what those yellow vertical pipes are over the site. The mixing zone is where groundwater meets surface water. It's a really critical issue because if the groundwater comes in too contaminated, the concentration in the lake is too contaminated. Michigan Department of Environmental Quality measures the mixing zone very carefully. That's what they're watching. And if they can get that level below a certain amount, then the City of Marquette doesn't have to do any more remediation. So the goal of the City of Marquette is to convince the state we don't have to work on it anymore, and the state's job is to monitor and say if you do. Recent studies from 2016 on, they sent out, you know those specialized boats, like the Jacques Cousteau specials we saw as a kid? The hydrology work, they do sound waves and everything. Do you see the yellow dots in that? That's the water pipe intake to Cliffs Dow. It's still there. It never got cleaned up. It never got pulled. It never got removed. And of all the things I read, that was the part that drove me nuts. Not that I'm calm to begin with. But last night, let me read this to you.
is there a pump to pump that water?
3 pumps. 3
Is
pumps
there
are
still
pumping
working?
water.
There's
The
still-
pumps are gone, but the pipe's still there. Here's what it says. Suspected pipe locations based on anomalies from the 2016 survey as shown in Figure 2. The intake pipe appears to be 3 feet in diameter and extends approximately 1,540 feet offshore. The pipe looks continuous without any apparent breaks, cracks, or staining. The terminal end of the pipe is in approximately 28 feet of water. At the offshore end, the pipe bends vertically, rising approximately 14 feet, and tees off into 2 smaller pipes that curve back down with openings about 4 feet off the lake bottom. They looked for a second pipe, and they couldn't find the second pipe. What they found were mounds of cobbles and boulders and sunken logs instead of the second pipe. Now, if you know the city plan for Lakeshore Blvd, they want to turn this into a swimming beach. I myself wonder, how are they going to do that unless they pull that pipe? And when they pull that pipe, how do they pull that pipe without putting other stuff into the lake?
Right.
Yes, ma'am?
Related to that pipe, actually, if the pipe is plugged on the shore, it's properly plugged, it's basically just a pipe in the water. If it's properly plugged.
Yes, that's the if.
If it's properly plugged, and if, while it was in operation, it was properly plumbed so that it only went in and nothing went out. Remember, the groundwater inside the plant was saturated with chemicals. So you're talking about 2 different things. We hope that it was blocked, However, I submit that when they move the road, they gotta do something about that pipe.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're gonna have swimmers coming out of the water saying, "Mommy, Mommy, there's a big monstrous pipe out there, rusty." Could be full of zebra mussels, we don't know. So this is 2016. Okay, this is the most recent stuff, I'll go fast now. City is requesting a no further action required status for the Cliffs Dow property in May of 2018, which is basically, you got no problems, no further action required, we're ready to develop. State of Michigan says, nope. Furthermore, compounds ethylbenzene, xylenes, naphthalene, and 4-methylphenol were detected at concentrations above the approved limits. You got trouble, my friends. You got trouble in Marquette, Michigan. 50 years after the plant's been shut down, they're still detecting quantities higher than approved limits. There's no post-closure plan. There's no plan for what you're going to do when you do your development. There's no forward thinking about what's going to happen when the bulldozers hit. There's none of this, we know you want to develop it, how are you going to handle it when that first bulldozer comes in? So the City of Marquette says, okay, if you have individual points that are above it, what we're going to do is switch to a area averaging method and sink a whole bunch more wells. The way this works is if you have 10 wells and 7 of them have higher than acceptable levels, you're sunk. But if you sink 50 wells and only 11 of those have higher than acceptable values, because you picked the source for the other wells to be outside of the plume, then you've lowered the overall average and you can pass.
I know I'm nervous.
So in June and July and August of this past summer, the guys were out sinking more wells. That was the city answer. Not we're going to clean it up, we're going to sink more wells. Nothing illegal. But when somebody gets up and says it's getting better, if you see me in the commission chambers going, that's what I mean. Okay?
And you can't ship it all off to Colorado either.
I hear Utah's good. And then previous site investigations, this is the one that I had to repeat. Tri-Media is the city's environmental company. It's not the state, it's not me, it's not a government, it's not a college. It's their own people saying this. They summarized investigations since '81 forward. They studied soil contamination, groundwater exposure, and contaminant mitigation. These are the people who know the most about the site that don't work for the state. I'm going to sit down while you read this. This is what is at that site right now. Widespread cover of fill materials. Slag, charcoal, cinders, concrete. Tar. I don't want to be sarcastic, it's too serious. Discrete, small pockets extending several feet below the water table in the retort, refinery, and tar settling areas. That means they've got pockets of tar throughout the site. Subsurface tar above or a few feet below the water table is considered to be the probable source of the groundwater plume contaminants. In other words, there's still massive amounts of tar on the site. And they have located them and started to map them. Several dissolved plume contaminants have exceeded both. There's all sorts of criteria. And basically the city is trying to match at least one criteria below that level because that's an argument for no further action required. But this is their own environmental specialist saying there's pools of wood tar on the land. Okay? Alternate monitoring, they're putting in alternate well clusters. 4 additional nested well clusters were installed between June of 2019. This is literally in the last couple of months. Their solution to having the state fuss at them was not to ship property to Utah, but to sink more wells. Sink more wells, get a broader spectrum, lower the average value to where the state says, okay, you're below the required. But not, and the day after the commission meeting where I actually showed, you know, your guy went to the planning commission and said it's getting better, but this correspondence says it's not. The next day, the city manager and the mayor were on TV saying, oh, we're doing mitigation on the surface. We're cleaning up the surface. Yeah, they're getting rid of the compost piles. They're getting rid of some of the other things that were left over from the city using the property. They're not shipping stuff to Utah, even though their own engineer has said it's there. Okay, in 2018, the City of Marquette put out a request for qualifications. This is after, they're after the state to change it. The state's not changing it, but they still put out an RFQ. Because it's part of the city master plan to develop this area. And God forbid, we not follow the city master plan. And this is the proposed development of the Viridia Corporation, and I invited them. And they're all off-site today at a management conference. They want to saturate that area with huge amounts of housing and people.
No.
They want to do that even if it weren't contaminated. To put that many people in that small a place would forever alter the ecosystem, for want of a better term. But they're talking about building on almost every square foot of that ground. So it's not like they've picked a spot where there's no contamination. We're just like BioLife picked a spot that had been fully remediated and picked an area where you're not going to have a lot of people. They're just going to come and donate and go back. Viridia is talking about saturating that area with housing and people and cars. And I'm trying not to make a joke out of this because this is way too serious. But remember the blue tar? Now, in your life, we've all had people who've done us dirt. Raise your hand. We've all had people. Think of the person you most wish ill fortune on. Would you want them to walk in that tar? Would you want them to live there with their spouse, child, grandchild, pet?
No,
Can you think of anybody who deserves that?
no. Well, you know what they're gonna do, they're gonna sell to people that don't know about this, is what they're figuring probably.
And that's called failure to warn.
Yeah,
And failure to warn will bankrupt Viridia, and once Viridia is bankrupted, they'll go after the city. That's the lawyer part of me. And I'm not hired by the city. 3 times I went in front of the commission and said, you should have me on board as a technical advisor. And 3 times they patted me on the head and said, we got this. We got our own people. We got our own people. Well, their own people said there's pools of tar all over the ground. I wasn't even going to go that far. I was just going to say, you got other problems. Yes, ma'am.
The tar you're talking about is different than the tar they used to make roads.
The tar you make roads is called asphalt usually, and it's formulated to make the road. The tar that's in the ground there was the byproduct of charcoal production. It's not formulated, it's just left
It was
over.
condensed from the fumes coming off of the...
Exactly, it's the leftover part they couldn't get useful chemicals from. But yeah, if you want to liken it to, if you had property where somebody had poured asphalt underground, I don't know what to say. There's just no common sense here. And the more I say there's no common sense here, the more they pat me on the head and say, we've got this. And I'm like, no, you don't. You haven't had it since '97. And the more your own environmental people tell you what's on that ground, the more you're trying to skew the numbers so you get below the threshold level so that the state will say it's okay.
What expertise is going into the location of those new wells?
Trimedia's picking them. I mean, I don't know.
They're not just, they can't ethically just cherry pick spots though.
Sir, I know they have to report the location to EGLE. And I know EGLE's been on top of this, no pun intended. They've tracked it very well. They know the location of all those wells. Every well's given the number, and there's a master map.
Sure.
I mean, I've seen that. But when you ask me why they're sinking more wells, I'm reading between the lines saying, your numbers are too high, and your lawyer said, we're going to go to a field averaging number. So you sink more wells, you get the average lower.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not written down like that, but there's no other reason to add more wells,
But you would get a more representative sample overall.
depending on where
Because
you're
you're sampling
at.
more spaces.
By the way, the young people who were out there June and July this year sinking wells, their handwritten reports are in the documents I read. They all report the same thing. When they sunk a well, they have special tools and equipment, and they label it and picture it. And they all report strong odor coming up the pipe.
In the wells, how deep are those?
It depends on the site. And I'm not trying to jog you, each one is at a different level. Yes, ma'am?
So, like, I'm just thinking out loud here, and I'm probably causing you a problem, but, okay, there's the tar, there's the odor. Okay, the people are living in these condos or apartments or whatever. They got kids playing in the yard. Maybe they do a little garden or try to grow an apple tree. Or the air coming up through the bottom. I mean, is there more than the smell?
Well,
Here's where
A
we.
danger? Huh?
Sir, can I answer you with a little bit longer than you want?
I mean, I don't want the smell.
Monday, 6 o'clock, the city commission is voting on changing the zoning.
yeah.
Right now, it's for municipal uses, which excludes residential. But the developer can't get capital for the development unless the zoning is changed to mixed use. The
Uh-huh.
planning commission recommended the change based on the city engineer going to the meeting saying things are getting better.
Yeah, well,
Planning commission notes are really good on that point. And I talked to Sarah Middlefield on the planning commission, and it was a very difficult meeting, but the city engineer kept saying, you know, this fits it, you have no reason not to do it, and things are getting better. So the planning commission is a recommendation to change the zoning. Here's how the rocks are gonna go down the hill. If we don't go to the commission meeting Monday night and say no, they're gonna change the zoning. Viridia then goes to the banks, gets the money for the development. Meantime, by the end of the year, the new wells will have been sampled enough. They go back to the state and request a no further action required. Once they get the no further action required from the state, they petition to have the deed changed. Right now, the deed for the property specifies no residential. But once they have the state saying no further action required, they petition to change the deed. Once the deed is changed to residential permitted, then Viridia starts building. Now, they're talking about vapor barriers. They're talking about huge barriers between the land and the water to prevent further migration. They're talking about having restrictions against no housing on the first floor, like that would be garage level, no gardens, no playgrounds, things like that. They're talking about all sorts of things like that. The fact is, the first thing that's going to happen next year, regardless of the zoning changes, they're moving the road. And when they start moving the road, the smell's coming back. For want of a better term, they've got a grant to move the road. They need the Viridia money to pay off their part of the grant. So the commission is focused on doing this. I don't know another way to say it. They're not listening to anything about common sense. And the fact that wood tar, their own people say there's wood tar there, isn't stopping them at all. And there's my frustration. I sit there at night and say, I can see this clear as a bell. What part of you build residentials on a former wood chemical manufacturing plant site?
is okay.
Yeah, what common sense is involved there? Unless people go to the Marquette City Commission, unless you start calling them tonight and telling them no, unless you show up, they're going to do this. And the ball is going to keep rolling down the hill. There's an election in 2 weeks. The two leading candidates, don't want to make fun of them. They're not scientific people. They were asked about Cliffs Dow, and their answer was, well, as long as it's safe, I think we should put low-income housing in along with a mix of residentials. And I'm like, there is no safe. There's a question of how much risk you accept. And number two, my opinion, I'm a candidate for city commission. When this goes to fruition, if there's one low-income apartment out there, it'll be facing Presque Isle. There'll be one. If there's one batch of housing for low-income people, it'll be facing as far away from the lake as you can get. Everything facing the lake is going to be $500,000 more because it's primo. I mean, look at what they're planning. This has nothing to do, and my arms are out like this, is you think you're fooling yourself if you think this is going to be affordable housing for the city of Marquette. This is a planned development for the super rich.
Yeah.
And the fact is, this frightens me even more because the super rich don't like it when their children walk to the beach and come back with a rash and complain about the smell. And then they go to the developer, and the developer says, well, the city said it was okay. And the city says, well, the state says it was okay, and the state doesn't say it's okay. The state says no further action required. That doesn't mean it's okay. Now you can hear my emotion in this. I can't help but be emotional. I went looking for the book on Cliffs Dow. I'm writing the book on Cliffs Dow, and the more I write it, the more concerned I am about the decisions that are being made right now. I'm 5th out of 4 candidates for the commission. I'm doing the best I can, but I can't get anybody interested in this. They're talking affordable housing and indigenous people days, and these are nice, lovely concepts. And Cliffs Dow is sitting there waiting to be plucked. Yes, ma'am?
Should we plant it with big trees?
If you ask me what to do, first of all, put up a fence all the way around and say, controlled remediated site area for access, contact this number, so you could run tours in there. We partner with Northern and their medicinal chemistry program, and we partner with Tech and their forestry program, and we partner with Lake Superior State and their medicinal plant program. We do a survey of all the plant life in there now, and we have certain areas set aside for birch trees and other types of trees and other, it's a wasteland right now. And we'd rebuild it into an area at least where things would grow, but then we would harvest the plants.
Right.
And analyze them and see what came up through the ground. Commissioner Hill is all about phytoremediation. If you've got 4 feet down, yeah, a plant can bring up a lot of gunk. But in the meantime, you leave it alone in terms of, there's wood tar underneath there. If you're not going to commit the resources to get rid of it, leave it alone.
Yeah.
Because anything you do, and that stuff comes bubbling up through the ground, that's like your prescription's down to 2 pills. You gotta pay attention to it. And the city has no money to pay attention to it. And you convince Viridia, and this is me talking as a candidate, you don't wanna build here. Go back to the hospital people. They want you there,
Yeah.
okay? Don't build here, but you can't get the city off the idea, the master plan says we're gonna develop Cliffs Dow, which by the way, it's said since 1969.
That's before anybody knew anything.
Well, that man who's been writing to EGLE for 30 years knew it.
Closing your ears.
Okay, I don't know how to say this. If we don't go to the commission, if you don't pick up the phone when you get home and start calling these people, and I'll put their numbers on my Facebook page, but their numbers are on the city website. If you don't start calling these people and leave a note saying, don't change the zoning, they're gonna do it. Because they're gonna do it because there's money for the city in doing it, and they have their own engineer telling them it's getting better. And they're not asking the right questions. Because I can tell you as an engineer, you can say there's a problem and your boss says, well, there can't be a problem. You're working around so you can answer your boss, not lying, but in some cases it's getting better. But your own engineering firm says there's pools of wood tar. It's never gonna be, sorry. If you don't do this, and I'll go and I'll say my piece, I got 6 minutes. There's gonna be public comment and a public hearing. I got 6 minutes total. Consequences of performing large-scale construction on the site will be felt by the people, animals, and ground and lake ecosystem of Marquette, Michigan.
Yeah.
So what do we suggest we do? Dwight and Cheryl Johnson lent me that Cliffs Dow suggestion box. They got it in a rummage sale. They've had it in his office for a long time. What do you suggest we do? We got to go to the commission. The first time I gave this speech, a lady sat there and said, it doesn't do any good, it's all a done deal. If we don't go, it's going to happen. If we do go, there's a good chance that they're going to pause. Because there's nothing that bothers the city commission more than when they walk in there and those chairs are full of people. There is nothing that freaks them out more. I remember when we did Presque Isle? Colleen was there for that. They were going to change the hours of Presque Isle so you couldn't drive there from 1 to 4 every day because it would solve the parking problem with the tourists. And I resented that. So I made some noise on Facebook and I caught the video of Commissioner Schlegel saying, what about charging a fee? And I got people riled up. By the time they all showed up at the work session, Colleen was magnificent. She got up and said, you talk about destination parking and we've all got to keep Presque Isle as a destination parking spot. Well, Donkers is destination parking. But if I parked in the wrong spot in front of Donkers, you sure heck would give me a ticket. And the look on their faces when they came out and saw all the people in that work session was like, crap. If we don't show up, if we don't make noise, they're gonna change the zoning, and the ball's gonna roll down the hill. And the more it goes down the hill, the harder it's gonna be to stop. And this is the second time I've given this speech. I've paid this young man to put it online for me tonight on YouTube, hopefully. I will send it to everybody I know. My facts are facts verifiable by documents I got from the state. I think I've separated my opinions from my facts. The best thing to do with that site right now is to leave it alone, post it so people don't go on there, and team up with some university experts and look at the foliage, look at the underground areas, and start talking about natural remediation. The estimate I heard from somebody who knows the site very well is if they really want to clean it up and do something good with it, it's upwards of $10 to $11 million. Nobody has that
How
time.
much? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, $10 to $11 million
10 or 11?
to clean it up. And what they're gonna do is what they've always done, excuse my language, as little as possible to get people off their backs. They're gonna do as little as possible. And then the rich people are gonna come in, oh, it's a beautiful view. Mommy, there's a bad smell, and my feet hurt. And Sandy the dog is scratching his ear. I'm not exaggerating, people. And I wish I had a better answer, because the city does need that property. But in 1997, they were sold a bill of goods. Oh, it's ready, there's no real problem. They need to go back to Cleveland Cliffs and Dow. They need Sarah Cambenzi, and they need our team in Lansing, and they need the governor to go to those two companies and say, you did this wrong. You cut and ran from your responsibilities to this area. And we need some help here. But whether it'll work or not, I've been told I'm a novice politician because I tell the truth. And I don't try to make people feel good about it. Yes, ma'am.
Is there been any research done on other areas of this type of manufacturing where there's been development? Because we know in large cities, there's the same type of issues from manufacturing plants.
They call it brownfield,
Right.
and there's a lot of brownfield developments. At the time Cliffs Dow was shut down, it was the last wood distillation chemistry plant in the United States. So I looked online, and the best I could find was an outfit in England that had run wood distillation, the same as Dow, but I couldn't find their remediation plan online. So we may be breaking new ground here. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, would they be selling this to whoever,
Meridian?
Meridian, as a brownfield? And if so, doesn't a brownfield come with, you get so many years of tax-free and all that kind of stuff?
I thought it was a brownfield.
Well, that's a little bit.
What is that? I don't know.
It was.
I mean, would they be selling it that way and then giving tax exemptions to this company and not helping us much?
I'm told that they have to have the property appraised and that the purchaser has to buy it at least 80% of the appraised value. Having it declared a brownfield site and making brownfield monies available, it's beyond my competency level right now. I haven't been involved in enough of that. I know that Founders Landing was brownfield, and there's tax breaks up and down and sideways for that. I know that the condos where Lakeshore Incorporated, that was brownfield as well. Brownfield isn't a panacea. It's encouraging people to develop in areas where there was manufacturing. But in this particular case, do you ever have a situation in your life or a person in your life and you finally come to the conclusion you just can't win with that person or that situation? Because when that comes up, you're not going to win. My view, and this is my personal view, is the City of Marquette isn't going to win with Cliffs Dow. There's too much in the way of them achieving what they wish to achieve with that area. There's the natural part, they've got to move that road, or there's not going to be a road out there. They can maybe fix the Holly Tar Ditch. I have great hope that spreading that water out over that area, those wetlands, will do more mitigation than what's been done naturally. And that Holly tar ditch has needed to be shut for years. But in terms of making the Cliffs Dow property a usable tax property for the city, I don't see it happening. I don't see any of that happening to our benefit. What I see, and I said it in front of the commission, is you guys are playing Russian roulette with the future of Marquette. And in 10 years' time, you're gonna have not one, not two, but 3 lawsuits by people who buy property there who didn't know it was a former chemical plant and have issues because of it. That is as clear as a bell. You're playing Russian roulette with the future of Marquette. And I'm starting to call that place Wood Tar Acres. They didn't like that very much. So I'm going to continue to call it Wood Tar Acres.
Start developing that and digging into that ground.
I live in,
Oh, it's gonna stink like, we got tractors stuck out there, that's not.
did you ever see something so clear that the common sense of it says, do not go? I mean, that blue stuff coming out of the ground, that's the beginning of every horror movie I've ever seen. The blue stuff's coming out of the ground. If they just got together and said, nope, we're not gonna go there, put a concrete patch over it, we're not gonna go there, there'd be no movie. But somebody always says, oh, I think I can fix that. And again, I'm one person. I will go there Monday night. They will have seen this online. They will put on their stone faces and they will vote to change the zoning. Unless enough people show up. Enough people email them, enough people call them. Call them on a weekend. Call them and say, I don't want the zoning to change on Cliffs Dow. It's a bad idea. I'm coming to the meeting. If they get enough calls this weekend and you get them talking to each other, there's a chance, skinny little chance, they'll postpone the public hearing. Yes, ma'am.
I think the whole reason for them trying to sell is to A, get it off their back, and B, make money. And I think if they turn it into a brownfield, they're not gonna make any money anyway.
Founders Landing is held up as an example of successful brownfield development. I've not been to a commission meeting yet in 2.5 years where somebody hasn't gotten up and fussed about Founders Landing. The first developer built on contaminated soil. They got to a certain point, they put in 6 feet extra cover to deal with that contaminated soil and took away the view. And the people of Marquette have been fussing about developers ever since. The very first developer did that under brownfield rules. Every developer after that faces that uphill hurdle. And with a business pro commission that we have, and if you don't vote for me, you're going to have 2 young people in office who are worried about recyclable containers for taking home leftovers. That's our issues. And affordable housing, where we're supposed to do plans that big cities do to bring in affordable housing. They've never proposed a plan that I've ever found has worked in any city under 2 million people. I'm not cross-talking them. I'm just saying, if you sit there, nothing will change. If you call them, you have a good chance. If you go Monday night, you have a better chance. I mean, I brought up the fact that they said their engineer said things were getting better, and I had the document from the state saying it wasn't, and I gave it to the clerk, and the minute said, Margaret Brumm pointed out some emails correspondence on this issue and handed them to the clerk. Well, there's nothing in the notes that said what I said. So it's like, it's only numbers. And not just you. Go home, call everybody you know in your book, and say, I'm going to the commission meeting Monday night. You want to come with me? Otherwise, I can guarantee you this. I don't need to point at you. Whatever else is going to happen, whatever well is sunk, whoever develops it, you're going to have the pleasure of smelling Cliffs Dow again. I guarantee you that. There's no way they can mess with that without that smell coming back. Whatever else they say or do, the smell's coming back. And we earned that smell for 60 years. It supported families that went on to live lives they wanted to live. Right now, that smell will come back, and we'll pay for it, and the only people that gain money from it will be the developer. And on that cheerful note, did I meet your expectations for this meeting?
No.
Was it worthwhile?
Yes.
Did I missed the boat with any of this with you. Did I talk too much about one thing, too little about another? A little bit too much on chemistry at the start, I know.
Yes, I'd like to add though, actually, as far as that developer, okay, they get the land, they have to go to the banking institutions to borrow the money to build all of this. I don't see where a banking institution, or a number of them, are going to do this like this. Just, you know, but we've got X number of millions, go ahead and build it.
The zoning change is Monday, the developer will be in the bank's office on Tuesday. That's all they're waiting on.
You think so?
Gotta have the zoning change before they can go to the banks. That's what they're waiting on. That's why we can't wait until it's time to approve the plans. I sat too many commission meetings where people say, what about this? And they say, oh, we're really far away. And the next thing you know, the signs are going up and the people are saying, oh, it's a done deal, it's part of the master plan. If you don't stand up now, if you don't join me Monday night, I'm gonna be there and I'm gonna say what I say.
Trust me, I'll be there.
Yes, sir.
I don't think you'll be alone.
3
And
minutes.
I will speak.
Yes,
I'll be
sir.
there.
What you need to do is when public comment is first announced, get up and say, I don't have to reserve time, but I'm gonna talk at the public hearing, but I want you to know, my name is so-and-so, I've lived in Marquette this many years. Something simple like, I don't wanna smell Cliffs Dow anymore. I'm not gonna gain an ounce if you do this and I smell Cliffs Dow again. It's too much. But then, if you have a personal connection to Cliffs Dow, if your family made a living off of it, that's legitimate. I mean, that's a real thing. On the other hand, if your family made a living off of Cliff Dow, and you've lost a lot of members of your family to various diseases,
That's what I'm wondering.
yeah, list them. List the number of people that you lost, that you've always wondered if it was because you lived next to Cliffs Dow. And remind them that we accepted that, unfortunately, we had to have that, like miners accepted the risk of going underground. But they're gonna bring back the smell and all the associated
What does
negativity.
it do to your lungs, you know?
And they're gonna do it in such a way, I'm sorry, but this town, this commission has been snake bit on Cliffs Dow. They cannot win. The only way to win is not to play. So I'm persuading you, this is my Toastmasters, I'm persuading you to join me Monday night. If you can't, call and email. Check my Facebook page, but if you just go to the city website, all the commissioners' phones and emails are listed there. And by the way, I have invited all the commissioners, all the candidates for city commission. Sally Davis is the only person who came last month, and she took some grief from the room, and she said, well, I'm here to learn. And after that, I endorsed her, which is pretty ironic since she's actually on the ballot and I'm a regular. But I thought, heck with it, she came to learn.
Yeah.
Do you have people who are in their own little bubbles of, I don't need to worry about this because it's getting better? And the 97 commission thought the same thing. They thought it was a good deal until they realized what they had traded away for. There's not an abundance of common sense in the world. And the Cliffs Dow remediation, I mean, I'm sorry, I have to talk to this lady because I've been staring here. What part of, excuse me, there's blue tar coming out of the ground, can we fix this, is not gonna be an emergency. What part of blue tar is something you sit back and say, I'm not gonna worry about that because the city engineer says it's getting better. And their own engineering firm says it's there. It's not me, it's not the state, it's their own engineering firm. Why don't they listen to their experts? Why don't they understand? It takes you a really long time to realize you can't win. And because we all think, oh, I'll be smarter this time, I'll be better this time. But you can't win. Let me conclude. I can conclude, actually. There's a story on the internet that I love. It was about an island off the coast of India. The loggers came in about 40 years ago and clear cut it, okay? And of course it destroyed everything. There's no animals, there's no birds, there was no ecosystem left. Few people were left that were fisher people that went back and forth. A very young man saw the clear cutting to his island. I mean, one day he had a very nice place to live and the next day there was nothing. So as young men often do, he made a vow. He said, I'm going to plant a tree every day, and everybody laughed at him. But for every day of his life on that island, he went out and he planted a tree. And 40 years later, he got his island back. The trees grew, and they brought the birds. The birds grew, brought seeds, and they brought bird predators. And then pretty soon, the mammals came across because there's food and there's birds and things. Once the mammals got there, the predators got there. And he brought back his entire island for 40 years of every day planting a tree. Cliffs Dow was the opposite. Every day for 60 years, they put more poison in the ground.
Well, they cut down acres and acres and acres of trees to do that.
Yes, they did. And I'm not as worried about the trees in the national forest because they have a really good replant phase. But you asked me what I do with Cliffs Dow, it's very simple. I get grants for the universities, and I turn it into a laboratory for remediation, and I have it mapped, and I turn it into a textbook of how you clean up an old site. Because when I was trained as a chemical engineer, we were just trained how to build. We weren't trained how to clean up, or what all the things you have to do to clean up. And, you know, explosion after explosion, driving more stuff into the ground is going to be a little bit of a problem. So you got the one guy planting the tree every day, and you got the city commission saying, let's sell it to Viridia, and we'll have the check mark next to our master plan. And then the condos will go up, and we'll get featured on more tourist magazines. And the smell will come back, and people will get violently ill, and we'll have health concerns.
That's the part.
And it'll stop midstream as the lawsuits begin. Because back in the day, there were no lawsuits, and trust me when I tell you that when that smell comes back, the lawsuits are going to start. And the city of Marquette can't afford the lawsuits. Yes, ma'am?
When you breathe in that smell, you're breathing in chemicals. right?
Yes, ma'am.
And those chemicals are toxic.
Well,
At different levels, yes. They have different levels of toxicity because each breath of smell you take has different components into it. I don't mean to be funny, but I don't want to say the smell was always consistent. The smell was based on the time of day of the cooking, the hardwood, how long it had been there, all sorts of things. But yeah, there's nothing good about the smell from Cliffs Dow. Yes, ma'am.
This is going a little bit further over, but do we know what the master plan is for the condos with Viridia? And yes, I don't think there should be developing on there, but I was just wondering.
I was going to be really snarky.
Go ahead.
go ahead.
All Viridia has given so far is the sketch I showed you with massive buildings. But if I had to guess what the master plan for Viridia would be, money, money, money.
Oh, yeah.
We want money. It's a rich man's world.
Well, it's easier to build there than take the hospital.
Well, the hospital was negotiating with them as a private entity, with Viridia right now negotiating with the city. The city has made many deals with Viridia. The guy who runs Viridia was interviewed on Word on the Street, and he used to work at a Blockbuster, and he saw that the boss never had to work, so he switched and became a real estate developer. He's not a fool. And he's done a lot of business with the city. He built a new, where Bunny Bread used to be, he built that whole plaza, which is well received and well regarded, and not a hazard to the community.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea, chemical engineers are the most phlegmatic, logical, rational, Mr. Spock people I know. They beat all the emotion out of you at Michigan Tech. You do the calculations, you come up with a number. Your number better be right. When a chemical engineer is forced to say things are getting better and the wells don't say that, it means the chemical engineer knows what the city wants him to say. And I'm saying that as my opinion. I may be wrong on that, except I have the documents from the state that do not bear out the statement that things are getting better. The status with the state right now is it's not better. They didn't earn a no further action required. So there, if you want to be upset with me about what I said, go right ahead. You know where I live.
What
Yes,
does the
ma'am.
state say about the water contamination from there?
That's where they've been bugging the city for over 11 years. A letter after letter after
And they're not
letter. They
paying
found
attention.
the chemicals in the water, and that Judy Akala finally said, we were told there wasn't a problem. We
Well, that-
understand now there is a problem. We've hired Trimedia. the light bulb went off.
But that was no, there's no remediation, I mean,
No, man.
that's one
The
that's just
only
gonna
remediation that's
continue.
been done, in 2011, when the blue tar came up, that was real.
Yeah.
Right now, in 2019, they're changing the ditch. Bye, Sherry, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. And the ditch right now, the Holly Tar ditch, that's remediation, that's real remediation.
Okay.
That actually makes some common sense. It's not perfect, but it makes more sense than letting that ditch run.
But
Yes, ma'am.
throughout the whole rest of that area, there's probably other puddles of tar that we don't know about.
Above and below the groundwater table. Their
Yeah,
own engineer said it.
yeah.
Dear friends, here's what we're up against. City Hall. Here's what they're concerned about. When people show up, they are very concerned about that.
Okay.
Show up, call up, bring your friends, bring your relatives.
Monday
Force
night,
your children to come. Force your grandchildren to come.
Monday
Force
night,
small children off the street into the commission meeting. Point at them and say, I want to grow up in a healthy environment. By the way, I'm not advocating kidnapping on the video. But I mean, I saw the commission change their mind on the hours for Presque Isle. I saw that happen. Colleen was the death blow to their idea when she got up and said, you know, it's destination parking in Donkers, and if I park there, I'm gonna get a ticket. And the whole commission went, they got us. And if you notice, they didn't change the hours going around the island, and they started to put up natural barriers, and they ticketed cars, and guess what? When my mom decides to go around the island, which she did yesterday, we drove around the island. So, I mean, it is possible to make a change, but if we don't do anything.
Monday night time,
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
City Commission, and the kicker is this, there's 3 public hearings scheduled. The one, the first one is the one on changing the zoning at Wright Street and Lakeshore Blvd. That's the Cliffs Dow Site. You have 3 minutes in general public comment at the beginning, and then for the public hearing, when they open that, they will have another public comment section.
But you have to request speaking in both.
Actually, you get up for public comment at the beginning, you don't have to reserve time for a public hearing, though you may. And if you want to drive them crazy, get up and talk at public comment saying, I don't like the idea of developing Cliffs Dow. I don't want you to change the zoning. This is the worst idea I've ever heard in the history of mankind. Do you people not have an ounce of common sense? And I'm going to say more about this in the public hearing. I want my time there. And then I think we had 14 people at the first statement on Presque Isle, and we had 17 at the end of public comment. By the time they went through all those 3 minutes, they'd had it. I don't know if we can change their minds on this zoning, but if we don't start now and continue it, it's going to roll and roll and roll, and the smell will be back. And I thank you for your
Well,
time.
I don't think it's just the smell, I think, what does it do to the human beings that gets that smell?
I'm with you.
I
What
think
does it do to
the
all of
smell
us
says there's something wrong
who
with
drive out to the island for a
Yeah.
break?
Yeah.
If we have to drive past that smell, knowing that soon there'll be 500 more people crowding.
You want an example?
What?
It's like, okay, we may forget the smell from Cliff Dow, but remember just riding up past the prison where you get down at the bottom of whatever, and what are those kills or whatever there?
Sewage treatment plant.
Yeah, well, whatever it is, you just wind up your window for that next 5 miles. And then you go on again.
Dear
I mean,
friends,
that's just saying how it is.
if I were a good politician, I'd be going door to door saying, what do you want me to do? I'm a lousy politician. I'm holding meetings at the library saying, I want you to go to the city commission meeting and say, don't do this. So vote for me and show up. Invest in your city, invest in your town. Don't let bad things happen. The people who worked there had to work there. There was no choice, and they had a lot of ignorance. We don't have that anymore. We have choices, and I have seen the city commission be responsive. And you know what? They didn't like it, but as soon as they were responsive, the world went on. So we can make a difference if we just keep going. Okay?